This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and a warm welcome to Global Business. I am Peninah Karibe. Let's begin with a look at the markets. The JSE closed lower today as investors awaited the US Federal Reserve's interest rate decision that should be out within the hour. There's high expectation that the central bank will ease monetary policy amid concern of a slowdown in global economic growth. The JSE all-share fell 0.46% to 56,979.46 points. Coming up on the show tonight. Zimbabwe's central bank sees $3.3 million in its first public auction of treasury bills in nearly 7 years. The rising rate of joblessness in South Africa. And a Ghanaian entrepreneur rolls out hair salon services on the road. Our starting point tonight is Zimbabwe, where the central bank has sought to raise about $3.3 million at its first public auction of treasury bills in nearly 7 years. And changed treasury bills issuance under former President Robert Mugabe worsened Zimbabwe's economic plight. Between 2013 and last year, the state held private auctions for banks and insurance firms through a central bank overdraft facility. This breached the country's borrowing limit by pushing its domestic debt to more than $9 billion. But now, and a staff-monitored program with the IMF, the Southern African economy has promised to limit its reliance on the overdraft facility as it seeks to revamp its capital markets. In neighboring South Africa, unemployment rate is at its worst level in 16 years. It's now at 29%. According to the second quarter labor force survey released on Tuesday, unemployment rose a further 1.4% from the first quarter of this year. Sumitra Naidu has the details.
It came as a shock, but no real surprise. South Africa is bleeding jobs.
Some of the contributing factors to the unemployment figures that we've seen is because of the subdued economic environment that South Africa has found itself over the past 3 or so years, where we've seen a lot of companies that have been retrenching a lot of young people just to deal with cost and revenue and debt servicing challenges within their own firms.
21,000 jobs were created in the second quarter of the year, mainly in trade, manufacturing and construction. But 455,000 people were left jobless. Employment declined in the formal sector and in private households. Unemployment amongst young people entering the workforce was again the worst hit. With the rising debt, especially on ailing state-owned entities like Eskom, many are concerned that this picture is unlikely to change.
Youth unemployment being the critical challenge towards this unemployment problem, it becomes the most crucial task or the apex challenge for government. One of those, why it is so and why this is also interrelated to the question of SOEs is because at the crux of growing any economy, power is needed in order to be able to do that. So that's why the Eskom question becomes such a difficult and very complex one, and we continue to see these bailouts of this particular utility. It would be, in essence, say Eskom is too big to fail as a consequence of that, because the bedrock of our economy is dependent on that.
So youth unemployment is a key focus area of the presidency. It's at a staggeringly high rate of 56.4%. So government has proposed various reforms and initiatives in this sphere, which hopefully will create, he's looking at creating an additional 2 million jobs for youth within the next decade. An overhaul of our education system needs to take place with critical skills that are needed. New skills need to be introduced so that our youth can be competitive when, as the fourth industrial revolution becomes more prevalent.
Despite a number of initiatives and promises to create meaningful employment in South Africa, real job creation has failed. The government has been warned to address structural reforms and to loosen labour legislation, but there's been little change. With the economy expected to record just 0.6% growth this year, this unemployment rate is set to worsen. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg.
Weak growth, high unemployment rate, and so on. In the 2018-2019 financial year, the electricity supplier recorded an annual loss of nearly $1.5 billion, a massive increase from the previous year's $162 million. CGTN's Angelo Coppola explains.
It's going to be a long and bumpy road as South Africa's power utility Eskom tries to claw its way back from a $1.5 billion loss from the last financial year.
So to put context to the size of Eskom's loss, it's about a quarter of their turnover, which is a massive hole to have in your financials. And the projections going forward indicate that, as far as I can ascertain, the hole is getting even bigger, and that's why the bailouts are projected to get bigger.
Government recently approved a $4 billion bailout to keep the cash-strapped entity afloat. The appointment of a chief restructuring officer is the first step in splitting the parastatal into 3 units to help it return to profitability.
The South African Institute of Chartered Accountants has agreed with us to second its CEO, Mr. Freeman Nomvalo. You might remember him as the Accountant General who worked in the Treasury for many years. We will then work with him to build this office and this particular capacity, ensure that the task that he has in this particular regard is firstly to interrogate Eskom's debt.
Government is hoping to finalise a white paper on the restructuring in the next few weeks, but it won't be a quick fix.
The restructuring process is not an event. It's going to take several years to do this restructuring, and it's a long road ahead with many pitfalls in a political environment which is uncertain and there's not consensus amongst stakeholders.
Consumers, who have had to bear the brunt of the crisis since 2008, will have to dig deep into their pockets once again.
There's going to be further price increases in electricity, more pain for customers of electricity. It was made clear today that prices are a long way from cost reflectivity. That means they are below the right cost. They're below the right price. They cannot meet their costs from the price of electricity.
Eskom is not the only state company in crisis, but it is the most crucial and could plunge the economy and the country into recession. Developments are being closely watched by the ratings agencies, who could downgrade the country's ratings if the situation doesn't improve. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Port Elizabeth, South Africa.
Saudi Arabia has deposited $250 million into the Central Bank of Sudan to support its financial position. The money is part of a $500 million package the kingdom is providing alongside the United Arab Emirates to alleviate pressure on the Sudanese pound. Both countries pledged an overall $3 billion in aid, with the rest going towards fuel, wheat and medicine. Sudan is still listed by the United States as a state sponsor of terrorism and is therefore unable to tap the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank for support. In some corporate headlines, Airtel Kenya's auditors have raised the red flag on the company's financial health after the telecoms firm posted almost $30 million in losses last year. That raises its cumulative losses to almost $650 million. The firm, which is in merger negotiations with the government-owned Telecom Kenya, is now insolvent. According to its auditors, Deloitte, these conditions cast significant doubt on the company's ability to continue. Kenya's top telecoms operator, Safaricom, meanwhile, plans to focus on expanding its mobile financial services business, M-Pesa, beyond Kenya. Interim Chief Executive Michael Joseph says he's keen to work with the team to take M-Pesa beyond the borders. He took over the helm of East Africa's most profitable company this month after the death of long-serving boss Bob Collymore. Safaricom is part held by South Africa's Vodacom and Britain's Vodafone. Miner and trader Glencore says its African copper business output was 5% lower than last year, while cobalt output rose 28%. Glencore's exposure to risk in Africa, including in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Zambia, has weighed on the company's share price, which has fallen about 6% since the start of the year. And the world's leading diamond company, De Beers, reported another sharp drop in its latest sales as a crisis squeezing the diamond industry gains momentum. The firm said says it sold just $250 million worth of rough diamonds in its most recent offering. This is 53% lower than a year earlier and the lowest since the 10th sale of 2015. It is battling to make a profit as demand slumps because of a surplus of polished stones and as demand for high-end jewelry stagnates. And that's a look at your corporate news. You're watching Global Business. Coming up. Dusit D2 reopens in Nairobi 7 months after terror attack. And Egypt builds its first vertical car park to ease downtown traffic.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay, we'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
The Dusit D2 Hotel in Nairobi, Kenya has held a flag-hoisting ceremony to mark the official reopening 7 months after a terror attack left 21 people dead. The hotel lost 6 of its employees in the attack. CGTN's Daniel Arap Moi has more on this.
The Nairobi Dusit D2 Hotel has officially reopened for business with the hoisting of the hotel's and Kenyan flag 7 months after its closure. The Dusit D2 Hotel was closed in January 2019 following a deadly terror attack orchestrated by the Somali-based Al-Shabaab militant group.
I cannot end without extending our utmost and heartfelt gratitude to the government, security forces, the diplomatic community, and all the organizations such as the Kenya Red Cross, Uber, Kenya Airways, and so many individuals that came to our aid during the time of need.
Members of the Somali-based Islamist extremist group Al-Shabaab attacked the Dusit D2 Hotel in 14 Riverside Drive in the affluent Westlands neighborhood on 15th to 16th January 2019, respectively. The coordinated attack started as an unknown number of gunmen attacked the complex, leading to a standoff that continued through the night, with people trapped in various parts of the buildings hours later. The attack and subsequent security operation to secure the hotel and complex lasted for nearly 20 hours. According to officials, at least 700 people were successfully evacuated from this complex on that fateful day, with 21 killed and 28 others severely injured. Kenya's Tourism Cabinet Secretary Najib Balala reiterated Nairobi's resolve to fight terrorism at all costs.
The spirit and the strength of Kenyans is back, and nobody, no terrorist, nobody will kill the spirit of Kenyans and its visitors from coming to Dusit.
In 2013, Al-Shabaab militants targeted the luxury shopping center of Westgate, killing 67 people in a siege that lasted several days. Militants from the group also killed nearly 150 people, most of them students, in an attack on Garissa University College in Kenya in April 2015. Daniel Arap Moi, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
This year, major progress has been made on the African Continental Free Trade Area after 27 countries ratified the agreement in Niger. While everyone agrees the deal has huge potential to usher in a new era of development for Africa's population of 1.3 billion people, experts are still asking how will this agreement be implemented on the ground. Izucha Okoronko.
At a July summit in Niger, African leaders launched the operational phase of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. But the challenges of actually achieving the initiative are still very much present. According to the head of the African Development Bank, Akiwumi Adesina, African nations will need to boost output of goods and services and incorporate payment systems if they are to benefit from this over $3 trillion economic plan.
You know, Africa cannot be a market where others simply import and put stuff in. Africa has to have its own industrial capacity to be able to take advantage of a $3.3 trillion market with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. So Africa has to industrialize. Industrialization is critical. It's not just about moving raw materials, it's value-added products.
The bank chief believes that solutions lie in mobilizing more domestic resources and encouraging sovereign wealth and pension funds to invest in infrastructure.
The African Development Bank last year, we launched what's called the Africa Investment Forum, where we brought in the world of investors to Africa. And here's what happened. In less than 72 hours, we mobilized $38.7 billion for Africa. So that tells me the opportunities are there if we can get the business and investment regulatory environments to work.
He also says nations need to provide the right incentives to boost local output while encouraging competition. Like Adesina, many agree that the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement has the potential to become a game changer. But it will require the strong political will and the formulation of enabling policies and instruments to guide it. Uche Okoronkwo, CGTN, Africa.
A workshop on trilateral cooperation on renewable energy by China, Ethiopia and Sri Lanka has opened in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. Ethiopia and Sri Lanka are partnering with China on South-to-South cooperation that will focus on enhancing access to renewable energy technologies. The project is expected to promote such energy solutions as biogas and solar. China has already pumped $2 million into the three-year project.
China, to begin with, has been a long-standing supporter of South-South cooperation. Secondly, because China is currently the world leader in renewable energy patents, ahead of the US.
Populated cities in the world. With around 2 million vehicles and 20 million people, it's usually challenging to find parking spaces. To resolve that issue in crowded areas, the government has built its first robotic vertical car park to accommodate vehicles in downtown areas. Here's Adil Mahroui with more.
Cairo is among the top populous cities in the world. The Egyptian capital has one of the world's worst traffic jams. Car parking spaces here are extremely limited. Double parking and violations to no parking signs are quite common. That causes additional suffocations in Cairo's traffic and makes a car journey in this huge city a painful experience to many people.
Parking has become such a hectic mission. I can't accomplish any errand anymore because of that. I have been waiting now in my car. I can't leave my car because I can't find a spot. That's always the case, and when there's one, it's usually far away from where I want to go. If I leave my car in the flash of a second, someone can double park and block my car's way out.
To resolve all of these issues, Cairo has thought to take all these cars away from the streets. The only way to save space was to stack them on top of each other vertically. That has led to the first electronic car parking system in the region, the Roxy Garage. In the heart of the Heliopolis downtown area, the garage stands equipped with the most recent robotic technologies. It takes only 1 minute to get the car into the 16 meters deep, 4 stories underground garage. After completing its second phase in 2020, this 40,000 meter square garage will be able to accommodate more than 1,700 vehicles.
The garage has the capacity to absorb all car parkings in the downtown area and its extension. In coordination with the General Authority for Traffic, we are working to free all parking spaces in the streets, to restore the Heliopolis area back to its civil appearance and free spaces for pedestrians and traffic movement.
To guarantee a maximum of 3 minutes recall time for any vehicle, the garage is equipped with 16 hydraulic robotic elevators. But all of that has increased its construction cost, making it reach about $28 million. People have to pay up to 90 cents an hour in peak times, which is more than what most regular parking spaces would cost for a whole day. It's why daily occupancy rates is as little as 11%, but the government sees potential in this project.
The Roxy Electronic Garage is the first of its kind in Egypt. The government has assigned the management here to implement more smart garages in Egypt and abroad.
Such projects will definitely help the country to create more walking and driving spaces in the streets. For people, it remains an expensive technology, and it's quite hectic if people need to pick up an item from their cars after the machines check them in. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
The use of drones is now widespread in Nigeria. From the entertainment industry to journalism, drones are now commonly used in the West African nation, even though there are regulations guiding their use. Most of these drones in use in the country are imported. However, one young Nigerian has now ventured into manufacturing drones locally. CGTN's Digi Badmans has that story.
Getting ready to test fly his drone. Draped in Nigerian and British national flags, Benjamin built this drone from scratch, using mainly locally fabricated materials. All set and ready, Benjamin pilots his drone into the sky. Pictures taken from way up in the sky have distinct aesthetic qualities, like this one, which captures a stunning view of the Abuja metropolis. He's been doing this for 6 years now, so he knows exactly what sensors get his aerial vehicle in motion. An estate surveyor by training, the self-trained drone maker explains how a mere hobby led him to become the pioneer of drone piloting and making in Nigeria.
I love to do things myself. I'm one of those DIY freaks. So I'm good with my hands, and I have a background of electronics and electrical systems. My dad used to be an electrical engineer. So I went online because basically most of the things I know today, apart from the career path I took in school, I learned almost everything I know today online.
Benjamin's office is an engine room, essentially where everything happens. He spends hours here assembling and fastening parts of the drone together with local materials in preparation for any outing or shoot.
Everything you see here was bootstrapped by me. I put a lot of funds into this project. So after 2016, without getting encouragement from any source, I stepped down, because that was when government came and said that they were banning drones. And in fact, at the point, they even said we should deliver our drones to the local authorities.
As it is for many local manufacturers, there's also a challenge for drone makers. In his case, it is the licensing and lack of recognition by the government.
I'd like giving up the art of building drones because there was really nothing coming from it, and the government has banned the use of drones in Nigeria without licensing. Licensing you can never get even when you apply. So, but recently I was invited by the British High Commission to come and exhibit at the Queen's birthday, which held in their residence in Abuja. So I built a drone for the exhibition with recycled materials, almost entirely recycled materials. I built it with wood, I built it with styrofoam and plastic bowl, sorry. You know, just to show them that, yes, there's a talent to it, you know, and the drone actually flies. It's not just for showcase.
With no funding and still not being able to secure a license, Benjamin is on the verge of completely giving up on his passion of making drones. He wants the government to at least relax some of the regulations on drones for people like him as a means of promoting made in Nigeria brands.
My simple message to the government is appreciate your own, no matter how crude it looks. Even in the US, nothing started like that. All these fighter jets they have today were not just built by the whim of a thought. They started through a process. A child has to crawl before the child walks, before the child can run. So when you find people with exceptional talent, put them together and encourage them.
Despite the challenge, he still nurses the ambition of becoming a leading drone manufacturer in Africa someday soon. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
You're watching Global Business. Still ahead. China and the US wrap up two-day trade negotiations in Shanghai. And one of the biggest data breach hits Capital One in the United States.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses.
Global Business
takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
For lucrative economic data out of the country, the country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Peninah Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives. News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Accra is my kind of city. That's because when I'm here, I feel like I'm back home in Lagos or Abidjan, which are two of the major cities I grew up in. See, business in
Africa is high risk.
After about a decade covering business news on the continent, I've learned it's all about the high risk, but also the high returns and the high energy. You simply have to adjust in order to keep pace. When I started out as a journalist, my dream was to open people's minds to the different perspectives. From the CEO in the boardroom to the trader out in the street, we all have different stories. From Accra to Addis Ababa, from Cairo to Cape Town, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here at CGTN, we realize that Africa is on the move, and it's moving fast, but we're moving right along with it. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, and I'm a business anchor and reporter at CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business. Let's now head to the U.S., where Fed Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell is making a statement on the bank's rate decision. Let's listen in.
We also decided to conclude the runoff of our securities portfolio in August rather than in September as previously planned. And I'll discuss the thinking behind today's interest rate reduction and then turn to the path forward. As the year began, both the economy and monetary policy were in a good place. The unemployment rate was below 4%, and inflation had been running near our 2% objective for 9 months. Our interest rate target was at the low end of estimates of neutral. Over the first half of the year, the economy grew at a healthy pace, and job gains pushed unemployment to near a half-century low. Wages have been rising, particularly for lower-paying jobs. People who live and work in low and middle-income communities tell us that many who have struggled to find work are now getting opportunities to add new and better chapters to their lives. This underscores for us the importance of sustaining the expansion so that the strong job market reaches more of those left behind. Through the course of the year, weak global growth, trade policy uncertainty, and muted inflation have prompted the FOMC to adjust its assessment of the appropriate path of interest rates. The committee moved from expecting rate increases this year to a patient stance about any changes, and then to today's action. The median committee participants' assessments of the neutral rate of interest and the longer-run normal rate of unemployment have also declined this year, reinforcing the case for a somewhat lower path for our policy rate. These changes in the anticipated path of interest rates have eased financial conditions and have supported the economy. At our June meeting, many committee participants saw that the case for lowering the federal funds rate had strengthened, but the committee wanted to get a better sense of the overall direction of events. Since then, we've seen both positive and negative developments. Job growth was strong in June, and looking through month-to-month fluctuations, the data point to continued strength. We expect job growth to be slower than last year, but above what we believe is required to hold the unemployment rate steady. GDP growth in the second quarter came in close to expectations. Consumption, supported by rising incomes and high household confidence, is the main engine driving the economy forward. But manufacturing output has declined for 2 consecutive quarters, and business fixed investment fell in the second quarter. Foreign growth has disappointed, particularly in manufacturing and notably in the euro area and China. In response to this weakness, many central banks around the world are increasing policy accommodation or contemplating doing so. After simmering early in the year, trade policy tensions nearly boiled over in May and June, but now appear to have returned to a simmer. Looking through this variability, our business contacts tell us that the ongoing uncertainty is making some companies more cautious about their capital spending. The domestic inflation shortfall has continued. Core inflation, which excludes food and energy prices and is a better gauge of future developments than is total inflation, has run at 1.6% over the past 12 months. We continue to expect that inflation will return over time to 2%. But domestic inflation pressures remain muted, and global disinflationary pressures persist. Wages are rising, but not at a pace that would put much upward pressure on inflation. We're mindful that inflation's return to 2% may be further delayed, and that continued below-target inflation could lead to a worrisome and difficult-to-reverse downward slide in longer-term expectations. So, Taking all of that on board, the committee still sees a favorable baseline outlook. Over the year, however, incoming information on global growth, trade policy uncertainty, and muted inflation have led the committee to gradually lower its assessments of the path of policy interest rate that would best support that outlook. Today, we judge that those factors warrant the policy adjustment I described. As the committee contemplates the future path of the target range of the federal funds rate, it will continue to monitor the implications of incoming information for the economic outlook and will act as appropriate to sustain the expansion with a strong labor market and inflation near its symmetric 2% objective. Thank you. I'm happy to take your questions.
Jerome Powell there announcing a rate cut of 25 basis points. The last time the U.S. Federal Reserve raised interest rates was in December 2008. While it may not be directly related, U.S. President Donald Trump has been urging the Fed to cut rates. Right now, let's recap the headlines at this hour. And a second case of Ebola in the DRC's eastern city of Goma has died. Ebola response coordinator Jean-Jacques Muyembe confirmed the death on Wednesday morning, a day after the case was announced. More than 1,700 people have been killed despite the widespread use of an experimental bat-effective Ebola vaccine. In Sudan, the Transitional Military Council has ordered schools across the country to close and lessons be suspended indefinitely. This follows mass protests over Monday's fatal shooting of 4 school children and 1 adult at a rally in the city of El Obeid. They were protesting against fuel and bread shortages. American lawmaker Nancy Pelosi has delivered a speech in Ghana's parliament urging for a strengthening of ties to improve the economies of both countries. The Speaker of the United States House of Representatives is in Ghana with U.S. congressional leaders to mark the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first enslaved Africans in America. And in Kenya, the Dusit D2 Hotel in Nairobi has held a flag hoisting ceremony to mark the official reopening 7 months after a terror attack left 21 people dead. The hotel lost 6 of its employees in the attack. And that's a recap of some of the day's top stories. China and the U.S. plan to meet again in September to extend trade negotiations as the latest round of talks wrapped up in Shanghai. The 2-day meeting took place against the backdrop of a fresh outburst from U.S. President Donald Trump, who, as the delegates gathered, let fly at China's perceived unwillingness to buy American agricultural products. It aimed to implement the consensus reached by leaders of the two countries on the sidelines of last month's G20 summit in Japan. Since the commencement of the trade war last year, the world's top 2 economies have so far hit each other with punitive tariffs covering more than $360 billion in two-way trade. At the same time, China's foreign ministry says the United States is flip-flopping in trade talks. The comment comes after U.S. President Donald Trump warned Beijing against stalling negotiations.
It's crystal clear who is to blame for flip-flopping in trade talks over the past year. China's stance on this issue has been consistent. There is no point in the U.S. pressuring China. Washington must show sincerity and goodwill in the talks.
From the press briefing room of the ASEAN meeting, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi also addressed the resumed China-US trade talks in Shanghai.
So this time is to continue to implement the consensus reached by the heads of states of both sides that reached in Osaka summit at G20, and this is also in line with the international society's aspiration. The 2 teams had a candid, constructive and efficient meetings, and they also make a very important step forward. I believe as long as the both sides, on the basis of mutual respect and equality, and also accommodate each other's concerns, by the end of the day, we will reach a mutual benefit agreement. This is not only fulfill the interests of both sides, and this is also the shared interest of the global community.
Heading to the U.S., the city of Detroit is hosting the second round of debates among Democrats looking to challenge President Donald Trump in next year's elections. One group that seemed to be closely watching that event are American farmers who have been hit by the ongoing trade friction with China. CGTN's Dan Williams has the details.
Michigan could be described as being ground zero for the 2020 presidential race.
Let's go, Joe!
A US state that solidly backed Democrats for decades, Michigan, along with the likes of Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, voted narrowly for Donald Trump in the 2016 presidential election. So how can Democrat candidates here win back support? One area could be farming. The trade dispute between the US and China has seen tariffs imposed on a range of commodities. New data show US soybean sales to China, the world's biggest market, slumped in the first half of the year to its lowest level in more than a decade. Although the Trump administration recently announced a $16 billion aid package for farmers, some here are calling for a long-term fix.
Don't put obstacles in our spots and don't pull things away from us. We don't want subsidies per se to live off of. We want to produce a crop that we get paid for. When government officials think, well, it's just subsidies that'll keep you going, well, those are Band-Aids.
Adding to the bleak picture for US farmers are low commodity prices, as well as bad weather during the planting season. This field on John Forrell's farm is full of corn, but this one just across the road is completely empty.
If you go back, the last time we had a major crisis in the farm economy you got to go back to 80s, where you probably lost a third of the farmers. And we are on the cusp of something like that happening if things don't change.
Many US farmers remain hopeful that a trade deal between China and the United States will soon be reached. But even if an agreement can be achieved, there are concerns as to whether the various markets will still be there.
If you look at some of the markets we've developed across the globe, they've taken years and years to develop and to build those relationships and to be that constant and trusted supplier. And if we can't be that trusted supplier, they're going to find it somewhere else.
Many US farmers face difficult challenges ahead, and some will no doubt be listening closely to the Democratic debates to see if their cause is being heard. Dan Williams, CGTN, Charlotte, Michigan.
Let's now turn to one of the biggest data breaches in the United States. Credit card issuer Capital One says the personal information of more than 100 million of its customers in both America and Canada was compromised during a massive data breach by a hacker. CGTN's Jim Spellman now explains from Washington.
Credit card applications of more than 100 million individuals in the U.S. and another 6 million in Canada were stolen from Capital One in this hack. The data was collected between the years 2005 and early 2019. Capital One says the breach included personal information, including credit scores, balances, payment histories, and contact information, plus 80,000 bank account numbers. Some information was encrypted, but roughly 1 million Canadian social insurance numbers and 140,000 U.S. social security numbers were stolen. Capital One says no credit card account numbers or login credentials were stolen, and it is unlikely the data has been disseminated or used to commit fraud, but the company will continue to monitor the situation. In a statement, the company's CEO writes this, quote, "While I am grateful that the perpetrator has been caught, I am deeply sorry for what has happened. I sincerely apologize for the understandable worry this incident must be causing those affected, and I am committed to making it right." Capital One is offering free credit monitoring to affected customers. The company expects the hack to cost up to $150 million this year. Prosecutors allege a well-known hacker named Paige Thompson was behind the breach. She's a 33-year-old Seattle-based software engineer who previously worked for Amazon Web Services, which hosted the Capital One server that was hacked. Online, she used the name Erratic and bragged about stealing the data on several online forums. Authorities say they were alerted to the hack after receiving an anonymous tip earlier this month. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
Apple shares slipped last month when longtime chief designer Johnny Ive announced that he would leave and start his own design company. Here's a look at Ive's legacy at Apple and why his departure could shake investor sentiments.
Outgoing designer Johnny Ive has been leading Apple's design team since 1996. Apple manages turnaround with Ive's works, starting with the first edition of the iMac launched in 1998. The iMac broke away from the standard gray computer boxes by wrapping the all-in-one machine in a translucent plastic shell. Then almost every revolutionary move came with Ive's name on it. iPod with a classic scroll wheel. iPhone that came in a standard exterior for a whole generation of smartphones, less button controls, and bigger multi-touch screens. The initial MacBook Air, introduced in 2008 at the world's thinnest. iPad, a mainstay in the tablet market since 2010. Ive touched on software design in 2013 and came out with the first major update to Apple's user interface, iOS 7. And it copied that uncluttered appearance on the smallest device possible, the Apple Watch. Ive also oversaw such architecture projects as Apple's retail stores and the company's new headquarters, the donut-shaped Apple Park in California. In fact, Steve Jobs referred to Ive as his spiritual partner at Apple, saying that they thought up most of the products together.
Let's look at the commodities market. Gold held steady today on track for a third straight month of gains. Oil prices too rose for a fifth day, buoyed by a bigger than expected drop in US inventories. And analysts said the market was quite optimistic ahead of the rate decision announced a while ago. As expected, the Fed cut interest rates by 25 basis points. Still ahead on Global Business. A Ghanaian entrepreneur rolls out hair salon services on the road.
Don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Investing in contemporary art is gaining traction in South Africa. While many still have a keen interest in what they are seeing and enjoy the aesthetics, many are increasingly growing their art collections as a means to build wealth portfolios. Sumitra Naidu takes a look.
The art world has always been steeped in elitism, with a strong focus on Europe and America. But in the past decade, the world has turned its eyes to the African art market. The African contemporary art segment is now booming with annual growth of up to 25%.
The global art market is it includes various different segments, but in terms of contemporary art, which is the majority of the market in Africa, and in South Africa particularly, anywhere between, depending on the estimate that you're working with, 67 billion and $75 billion US, which is kind of a drop in the corporate ocean, but it's quite a significant number when you're talking about a trade in artworks.
Globally, the contemporary art segment on its own has average growth of 88%. Much of this increase is due to the number of new art fairs, galleries and museums that have opened in the last 2 decades. But it's the growing number of investors keen to grow their portfolios that's largely driving this demand. The local African market is gaining traction too, as international art lovers are starting to appreciate local artistry.
It's a growing awareness that there's a lot of talent and there's been a history of art making in Africa. A lot of the museums have realized they have collections which don't reflect that, and it's time to address that. So the knowledge of the curators, the historians about Africa has grown, many more visits, understanding events, art fairs has brought them, and the awareness of what it is and the beauty of a lot of the work coming out of Africa, especially in photography, has had a big impact on collectors all over the world.
Global auction turnover on fine art rose 18% in June 2018, totaling $8.5 billion. The market grew on all continents with a massive 48% increase in turnover in the United States of America. The other major markets followed suit with $2 billion in turnover in China and turnover up over 18% in the UK to $1.9 billion.
It really is a passion project to start out with, and then when you're getting into investment collecting, as if you're buying from auction and you're building up a substantial collection, you can start looking at artists who might be performing at a level that is on the up. 10 years time, you're going to get a huge return on collecting investment.
According to the latest wealth report, South African fine art pieces rose 28% in the last decade, while global fine art pieces rose by 12% over the same period. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Dar es Salaam may be one of the world's fastest growing cities, but there is a shortage of jobs, especially for women. According to a World Bank report, women in Tanzania make up the larger share of the working age population, but a smaller share of the economically active population. Many are driven into a life of poverty and exploitation. One training center is now trying to break that cycle by offering skills, empowering underprivileged young women in the city. CGTN's Daniel Kijo has more.
In this workshop in Tanzania's commercial city, these young women are not only transforming pieces of fabric, but also their lives. They're learning business and handcrafting skills at Sifa Threads, an organization determined to help turn lives around. Cecilia, like many young Tanzanians, was forced to drop out of school despite having dreams of becoming a doctor.
I had to.
Teenagers have dropped out of school, the majority of whom...
We could be more helpful in this community is to help young women and almost do preventative care for children that may become orphans.
50 students have graduated from Sifa Threads. Some have returned as interns at the center, and others have opened their own businesses. Currently, a new batch of 20 students has just begun training. Keeping groups small ensures that each woman receives dedicated training.
Something as small as a needle and thread can change the course of someone's life. In a country where formal education is still low, having skills like these can have an impact that lasts for generations.
Facing acute and growing demands for training, the founders of Sifa Threads are now supporting graduates to open their own training centers across the city. Cecilia hasn't given up on her dreams.
I hope that when I live here, I won't depend on my family or anyone else. I won't be a dependent. I hope to do something big so I can also help others.
Skills taught at the center include tie-dyeing fabrics, screen printing, tailoring, and leather crafts. This knowledge has allowed graduates to design and create products that they now sell. As the sales increase, they feel they're moving closer to creating a life they can be proud of. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
Hairstylists in Ghana are finding more creative ways of reaching out to their customers. A new industry trend is hairstylists going mobile. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai caught up with Ghanaian entrepreneur Rebecca Appiah, who operates a salon on wheels in Accra.
Ghanaian hairstylist Rebecca Appiah is on the move. With this van, she meets her customers wherever they are to style their hair.
We come to your homes, your comfort zone, wherever you are, whatever you want to do, we come to you, get to wash your hair, get to braid your hair, to keep time, catch up your time so that you don't have to go and spend 2-4 hours in the salon waiting.
According to a research by African Beauty Market, the beauty industry in the Middle East and Africa was estimated at more than $27 billion in 2018. In Ghana, the hair salon industry is seeing significant growth. With rising competition, Apia had to get creative to stay in business. She says she spent $100,000 to set up this mobile salon.
It took me 6 months to put this together. This is Ghana made. I made this at home in my house, little by little, because I sell hair already. My little savings pushed me, and I got a little push up from my parents.
The van is solar powered, and customers are treated to free Wi-Fi while they get their hair done. Rebecca says she's able to provide services to at least 6 customers a day right now. As the business grows, she hopes to get more vans and expand their operations across the country. Customers are happy about the convenience of this mobile salon service.
It doesn't waste my time to do other things. They help me. If I want to go out, to go and do something, I do it comfortably because I did not go out. They came to me to do it. So in fact, I'm very, very happy. It's very good.
Apia hopes to provide jobs for other young people while also driving change in Ghana's hair salon industry. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
And looking at the currencies, Kenya's central bank pumped dollars into the foreign exchange market today and sought to soak up excess liquidity after the shilling sank to its lowest level against the dollar in nearly 5 years. The shilling has been one of Africa's top performers this year, but it has lost 1.2% against the dollar in the past 6 sessions due to heightened political risk at home, a stronger dollar, concerns about export earnings, and excess liquidity in the money market. It fell to an intraday low of 104.55 per dollar today, and that's from 103.20, 103.30 on Monday last week, forcing the central bank to intervene and set it back to 104 level. And with that, we come to the end of Global Business. We invite your feedback, send it to the contacts on the screen, and follow us on our digital media platform. I'm Peninah Karibe. Thank you for watching.